February 8, 2006. Somewhere over western Iraq. A lone F-14D Tomcat descends through the darkness toward a target that Iraqi insurgents will never see coming. Lieutenant Bill Frank of Fighter Squadron 31 releases a 500-pound satellite-guided bomb, watches it fall away into the night, and becomes part of history. That weapon is the last bomb ever dropped from an F-14 Tomcat. Hours later, Captain William Sizemore traps his aircraft aboard USS Theodore Roosevelt at 00:35 hours, completing the final combat recovery of a Tomcat in American naval history. After 32 years, 5 air-to-air kills, and missions spanning from the Mediterranean to the mountains of Afghanistan, the most iconic carrier-based fighter ever built is going home for good. But why did the Navy keep the F-14 until 2006, when its replacement, the F-18 Hornet, had been flying for over 2 decades? The answer lies in capabilities that no other aircraft could match, a weapons system so powerful that adversaries fled at the mere detection of its radar, and a fleet defense mission that disappeared from American naval aviation the moment the Tomcat retired. This is the story of the Interceptor no Hornet could replace. The F-14 Tomcat was born from failure. In the early 1960s, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara forced the Navy into a joint service program called the Tactical Fighter Experimental, producing the General Dynamics F-111B. The concept seemed logical. One airframe for 2 services would reduce costs and simplify logistics. The Air Force needed a low-level strike aircraft. The Navy needed a fleet defense fighter. McNamara believed one design could do both. The reality was catastrophic. The F-111B weighed nearly 80,000 pounds, far too heavy for carrier operations. Its swing wings worked well for low-altitude penetration, but created excessive drag at the altitudes where fleet defense fighters operated. The aircraft could not perform the fighter mission the Navy desperately needed. Grumman, partnering with General Dynamics, attempted multiple weight reduction programs. None succeeded. The fundamental design prioritized Air Force requirements over Navy needs, and no amount of engineering could overcome that original sin. The mission driving the Navy's desperation was existential. Soviet long-range bombers posed a terrifying threat to American carrier battle groups. The Tupolev Tu-16 Badger carried the KS-1 anti-ship missile, with a range exceeding 100 miles. The emerging Tu-22M backfire was even more dangerous, carrying supersonic missiles that could strike from over 250 miles away. A coordinated attack by 24 backfires launching 50 missiles simultaneously could overwhelm any carrier group's defenses. The Navy's F-4 Phantom II, while formidable in many respects, lacked the radar range and missile reach to intercept these threats before launch. The Phantom's AWG-10 radar could detect bomber-sized targets at roughly 40 miles. By the time an F-4 got within missile range, the Soviet bombers would have already released their payloads. The Navy needed something unprecedented, an aircraft that could detect threats at over 100 miles and kill them before they ever fired. Vice Admiral Thomas Connolly, Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Air Warfare, had championed the F-111B program for years. But by 1968, even he recognized the aircraft was a disaster. Testifying before the Senate Armed Services Committee, Connolly delivered the program's death sentence with words that became legend. "There is not enough thrust in all Christendom," he declared, "to make a Navy fighter out of that airplane." The statement was politically risky. Connolly was directly contradicting the Secretary of Defense, but his honesty resonated with Congress. Congress killed F-111B funding in May 1968. 2 months later, the Naval Air Systems Command issued requirements for the Naval Fighter Experimental Program. The specifications were ambitious. The new aircraft needed to reach Mach 2.3 or higher. It needed a radar capable of tracking multiple targets simultaneously at extreme range. It needed to carry the Phoenix missile that had been developed for the failed F-111B, and it needed to operate from aircraft carriers. 5 companies submitted proposals. General Dynamics, Grumman, Ling-Temco Vought, McDonnell Douglas, and North American Rockwell all competed. Grumman's design, led by engineering manager Bob Kress, stood out for its elegant solution to the variable sweep wing problem. Rather than placing the wing pivots close together near the aircraft's centerline as the F-111 had done, Grumman spread them far apart, near the fuselage edges. This allowed weapons to be carried on fixed wing glove pylons without the complex swiveling mounts that had added weight and drag to the F-111. Grumman won the contract in January 1969. The first F-14A, Bureau number 157980, flew on December 21, 1970, from Grumman's flight test facility at Calverton, Long Island. Chief Test Pilot Robert Smith sat in the front cockpit with Project Test Pilot William Miller, known by the call sign Bill, in the rear seat. Poor weather limited the maiden flight to 2 low-speed circuits at 3,000 feet, but it occurred 1 month ahead of schedule, just 22 months after contract award. The Navy had learned from the F-111B debacle. They pushed development aggressively, skipping the prototype phase entirely and moving directly to full-scale development. Tragedy followed 9 days later. On December 30th, both hydraulic systems failed simultaneously during a test flight. The aircraft became uncontrollable. Smith and Miller ejected at just 25 feet above the treetops, traveling at roughly 500 feet per second. Both parachutes deployed. Both pilots survived. But the incident highlighted the risks of accelerated testing. Miller's luck ran out on June 30th, 1972. During an airshow preparation flight over Chesapeake Bay, the 10th Development F-14 entered an unrecoverable spin. Miller ejected but was killed. The Tomcat community lost one of its founding pilots before the aircraft ever reached the fleet. His contribution to the program's success would not be forgotten. The danger zone that test pilots accepted was not theoretical, it was measured in lives. The Navy accepted its first operational F-14s through Training Squadron VF-124 beginning in June 1972. The first fleet squadrons, VF-1 Wolfpack and VF-2 Bounty Hunters, made the Tomcats' inaugural operational deployment aboard USS Enterprise in September 1974. The aircraft's name honored Admiral Connolly, Tom's cat, while continuing Grumman's feline tradition: Wildcat, Hellcat, Bearcat, Panther, Cougar, Tiger, and now Tomcat. Over the production run from 1970 to 1992, Grumman built 712 F-14s, 558 F-14, as for the Navy, 79 for Iran, 38 new-build F-14Bs, and 37 F-14Ds, plus 61 conversions from A models. The production line at Calverton employed thousands of workers on Long Island and created a legacy that defined American naval aviation for a generation. The F-14's variable sweep wings could move from 20 degrees fully forward to 68 degrees fully swept, with a 75-degree oversweep position for carrier deck storage. The wings adjusted automatically based on speed and altitude, controlled by the Central Air Data Computer. This gave the Tomcat extraordinary versatility. Forward sweep for slow-speed carrier approaches, where the extra lift helped pilots manage the delicate task of landing a 60,000-pound aircraft on a pitching deck. Swept back for supersonic dash at Mach 2.34, roughly 1,544 miles per hour at altitude, when fuel economy mattered less than reaching a threat before it could launch. At 62 feet 7 inches long, with a 64-foot wingspan fully extended, the Tomcat was enormous by carrier fighter standards. The aircraft carried approximately 16,000 pounds of internal fuel, giving it a combat radius of roughly 500 to 600 nautical miles, depending on mission profile and weapons load. Ferry range exceeded 1,800 nautical miles in the F-14A, over 2,000 nautical miles in the later variants with more efficient engines. Maximum takeoff weight reached 74,348 pounds. The two-person crew, pilot in front and radar intercept officer in back, sat in Martin Baker ejection seats rated for 0 altitude, 0 airspeed escape. The tandem seating arrangement was critical to the Tomcat's effectiveness. While the pilot focused on flying the aircraft, the RIO managed the complex radar system, identified targets, and guided missiles to their targets. The workload in a single-seat aircraft would have been overwhelming. The Tomcat demanded teamwork. The true revolution sat in the nose. The Hughes AN/AWG-9 radar system was the most powerful airborne intercept radar on any operational fighter in the Western world. This distinction held for over 3 decades, until the F-22 Raptor's APG-77 arrived in 2005. With 10.2 kilowatts of peak power and a 36-inch planar array antenna, the AWG-9 could detect bomber-sized targets at over 150 nautical miles. Fighter-sized targets appeared at approximately 115 nautical miles. Its defining capability was revolutionary. The AWG-9 could track 24 targets simultaneously and engage 6 with missiles at once using a track-while scan mode. Previous radars required dedicated tracking of a single target, blinding the aircraft to everything else. The AWG-9 searched roughly 15 times more airspace volume than competing radars while maintaining full situational awareness. The F-14D received the upgraded AN/APG-71, a digital evolution incorporating technology from the F-15E Strike Eagle's APG-70. This new radar improved clutter rejection, enhanced resistance to electronic countermeasures, and pushed the maximum detection range even further. The AWG-9's partner was the weapon it was built to guide: the AIM-54 Phoenix. The AIM-54A variant weighed 985 pounds and stretched 13 feet long. The heavier AIM-54C weighed over 1,000 pounds. This was the world's first aerial weapon capable of simultaneously guiding multiple missiles against multiple targets. The AIM-54A flew at speeds reaching Mach 4.3, with the improved AIM-54C exceeding Mach 5. The missile climbed to altitudes above 80,000 feet during its flight profile before activating its own onboard radar at approximately 11 miles from the target for terminal guidance. The AIM-54C variant had an effective range beyond 100 nautical miles, more than double the range of any other Western air-to-air missile of its era. At maximum range engagements, the Phoenix could strike targets that the launching aircraft would never see with its own sensors. The missile's autonomous terminal guidance meant the F-14 could immediately turn to engage other threats while its Phoenix missiles pursued their original targets independently. The F-14 could carry 6 Phoenix missiles simultaneously. 4 mounted on aerodynamic pallets in semi-recessed wells in the underside of the fuselage. 2 more under the fixed wing glove stations. A full load weighed over 8,000 pounds. The practical cost of this loadout was staggering. Each Phoenix missile cost approximately $500,000 in 1973 money, making a full 6-missile load worth more than some entire aircraft. In a famous test on November 21, 1973, Commander John Smoke Wilson and Lieutenant Commander Jack Hoover took off from Point Mugu with a complete Phoenix load. They launched all 6 missiles over a period of 38 seconds against 6 separate target drones. The targets were spread across a 15 nautical mile frontage at altitudes between 20,000 and 24,000 feet, traveling at speeds from Mach 0.6 to Mach 1.1. 4 Phoenix missiles scored direct hits. 1 broke lock due to a target drone flight control failure. 1 suffered a mechanical problem with its radar antenna. The test remains one of the most expensive single weapons evaluations ever conducted. Commander Wilson reportedly quipped that it was like setting fire to a 10-story parking lot filled with new Cadillacs. Beyond the Phoenix, the Tomcat carried AIM-7 Sparrow medium-range missiles, AIM-9 Sidewinder short-range infrared missiles, and an internal M61 Vulcan 20mm cannon with 676 rounds. The total external ordnance capacity reached 14,500 pounds across 10 hardpoints. In its later Bombcat configuration, the F-14 also carried the LANTIRN targeting pod and delivered laser-guided bombs, satellite-guided munitions, and conventional weapons with devastating precision. The F-14 existed in 3 primary variants, each representing a significant evolution in capability. The F-14A was the original production model, powered by 2 Pratt & Whitney TF30P414A afterburning turbofans, producing 20,900 pounds of thrust each in afterburner. This engine would prove to be the Tomcat's greatest weakness, but we will return to that troubled history shortly. The F-14B, originally designated F-14A+, replaced the troubled T F-30 with the General Electric F-110GE 400. This power plant produced approximately 27,000 pounds of thrust per engine, a 29% increase over the TF-30. More importantly, it offered a 61% improvement in climb rate and the ability to launch from a carrier without afterburner. Carrier crews called it the difference between nursing a sick aircraft into the sky and riding a rocket off the bow. The F-14D Super Tomcat represented the ultimate expression of the design. It combined the F-110 engines with the APG-71 digital radar, a glass cockpit with modern displays, Link 16 tactical data link for sharing target information across the battle group, and NACES ejection seats. This aircraft could do everything the original Tomcat could do, but better, faster, and more reliably. Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney capped F-14D production at just 55 aircraft in 1989, calling the Tomcat 1960s technology. The decision reflected Pentagon priorities that favored new aircraft programs over upgrades to existing platforms. Tomcat advocates still dispute that assessment bitterly, arguing that the Super Tomcat was a 1980s aircraft wearing a 1960s skin. The F-14's combat debut came on August 19, 1981, over the Gulf of Sidra. Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi had declared the entire Gulf as Libyan territorial waters, extending his claimed boundary well beyond the 12-mile limit recognized by international law. The United States rejected this claim through freedom of navigation exercises, deliberately operating within the disputed zone to assert international rights. 2 F-14. As from F-41 Black Aces aboard USS Nimitz were flying combat air patrol roughly 60 miles from the Libyan coast when Radar Intercept Officer Lieutenant David Venlet detected two contacts 80 miles south. The contacts were heading north, directly toward the American aircraft. They were Libyan Su-22 fitters, Fast Eagle 102, flown by Commander Henry Kleeman with Lieutenant Venlet in back, and Fast Eagle 107, flown by Lieutenant Lawrence Majinski with Lieutenant Junior Grade James Anderson as RIO, turned to intercept the Libyans. The two formations merged in a near head-on pass at high speed. At approximately 300 meters separation, the lead Su-22 pilot did something unexpected. He fired an AA-2 Atoll heat-seeking missile at Fast Eagle 102. The Atoll missed. But its launch changed everything. Under peacetime rules of engagement, the American pilots needed hostile intent to engage. A missile launch provided that intent beyond any doubt. Cleared to return fire, Commander Kleeman rolled his F-14 behind the lead fitter and fired an AIM-9L Sidewinder. The missile tracked straight into the Su-22's tailpipe and detonated. The Libyan pilot ejected within 5 seconds. Lieutenant Majinski had followed the second Su-22 as it attempted to escape. He maneuvered into firing position and launched another Sidewinder. The missile severed the fitter's tail section. The aircraft tumbled out of control. 2 kills in under 1 minute. The first confirmed air-to-air victories for the F-14 and the Navy's first aerial combat kills since the Vietnam War. The Black Aces had proven the Tomcat in combat. More importantly, they had proven that Soviet-equipped adversaries would think twice before challenging American naval aviation. The second Gulf of Sidra incident occurred on January 4, 1989, 8 years after the first engagement. 2 F-14. As from F-32, swordsmen aboard USS John F. Kennedy were conducting a routine combat air patrol when they detected 2 Libyan MiG-23 floggers approaching from the south. The Tomcat crews, Commander Joseph Connolly with Commander Leo Enright, and Lieutenant Herman Cook III with Lieutenant Commander Stephen Collins, followed a careful protocol designed to demonstrate defensive intent. They performed 5 separate turns away from the approaching MiG-23s, each time presenting their tail aspect to the Libyans. Under international law and military practice, this maneuver signals that the turning aircraft is not hostile. Each time, the Libyans turned back onto an intercept course. The MiG-23s were closing range aggressively. The RIOs called out the decreasing distances. 20 miles, 15 miles, 10 miles. Authorized to fire in self-defense under the same rules of engagement that had governed the 1981 incident, Lieutenant Cook's crew destroyed one MiG-23 with an AIM-7M Sparrow at 5 nautical miles. Commander Connolly finished the second with an AIM-9 Sidewinder at 1.5 miles. Both Libyan pilots ejected but were never recovered. Pentagon released photographs from the F-14's television camera system showed the MiG-23s armed with AA-7 Apex missiles. These were air-to-air weapons, not reconnaissance equipment. The images silenced Libya's claim that the aircraft were unarmed reconnaissance planes conducting a peaceful mission. The swordsman had added 2 more kills to the Tomcats' growing legend. During Operation Desert Storm from January to February 1991, 10 F-14 squadrons deployed on 5 carriers, flying over 4,000 combat sorties. The Tomcats performed escort missions for strike packages, flew combat air patrol over the fleet, conducted fighter sweeps into Iraqi airspace, and carried the TARPS reconnaissance pod to photograph targets before and after strikes. Yet the Tomcat scored only 1 air-to-air kill during the entire conflict. On February 6, 1991, Lieutenant Stuart Brose and Commander Ron McElraft of VF-1 Wolfpack destroyed an Iraqi Mi-8 helicopter with an AIM-9M Sidewinder. They were flying from USS Ranger with an inoperative AWG-9 radar, vectored to the target by an AWACS aircraft. The kill was legitimate but anticlimactic. A helicopter destroyed by a fighter designed to kill supersonic bombers at 100 miles. The single kill frustrated F-14 crews intensely. The explanation was systemic rather than coincidental. Air Force F-15Cs received offensive sweep assignments that put them over Iraqi airspace where targets could be found. F-14s were largely tethered to carrier defense, protecting the battle group from threats that never materialized. Strict rules of engagement requiring positive visual identification before firing negated the Tomcats' beyond visual range advantage. The whole point of the Phoenix missile was to kill enemies before they got close enough to see. But the coalition's understandable concern about fratricide meant that F-14s could not use their signature weapon system to its full potential. Iraqi pilots who detected F-14 radar tracking them routinely fled northward, away from the carriers. Often they ran directly into waiting F-15s who did have clearance to engage. The Air Force accumulated kills that might have belonged to the Navy. The conflict's only F-14 combat loss occurred on January 21, 1991. An F-14A+ from VF-103 was flying a combat air patrol mission near Al-Assad Air Base when an SA-2 surface-to-air missile struck the aircraft. Pilot Lieutenant Devon Jones ejected successfully and was dramatically rescued by an Air Force search and rescue team in one of the war's most celebrated recovery operations. Radar Intercept Officer Lieutenant Lawrence Slade ejected but was captured by Iraqi forces. He spent 43 days as a prisoner of war before his release. No F-14 was ever shot down by another aircraft in United States Navy service. The Tomcats' 5 air-to-air kills came without a single loss to enemy fighters. This perfect combat record against aerial opponents remains one of the aircraft's proudest legacies. The F-14's transformation from pure interceptor to precision strike platform began over Bosnia. On September 5, 1995, VF-41 Black Aces dropped the first air-to-ground ordnance ever delivered in combat by a Navy F-14, hitting an ammunition dump in eastern Bosnia with GBU-16 laser-guided bombs during Operation Deliberate Force. The squadron that had scored the Tomcats' first air-to-air kills now opened a new chapter in the aircraft's history. The true breakthrough came during Operation Desert Fox in December 1998. VF-32 swordsmen used the LANTIRN targeting pod for the first autonomous precision bomb delivery by an F-14. Previous laser-guided bomb deliveries had required a second aircraft or ground controller to designate the target with a laser. Now the Tomcat could find, designate, and destroy targets entirely on its own. Over Kosovo in 1999, VF-14 Topfatters dropped 350 laser-guided bombs during Operation Allied Force. The Bombcat concept was proven. An aircraft designed to kill supersonic bombers at 100 miles could also destroy bunkers, bridges, and armored vehicles with single bomb precision. After September 11, 2001, the Tomcat became one of the Navy's most prolific strike platforms. VF-213 Black Lions dropped the first bombs of Operation Enduring Freedom on October 7, 2001, striking surface-to-air missile positions near Kabul. The irony was not lost on anyone. Aircraft designed to protect carrier groups from Soviet bombers were now attacking primitive anti-aircraft sites in landlocked Afghanistan. Over the following months, F-14 squadrons collectively dropped more than £1.3 million of ordnance over Afghanistan. They flew marathon 6 to 8 hour missions with multiple aerial refuelings, reaching landlocked targets from carriers in the Arabian Sea more than 500 miles from Afghan airspace. The Tomcat's exceptional range and endurance, originally designed for fleet defense patrols, proved equally valuable for strike missions. VF-11 Red Rippers and VF-143 Pukin Dogs delivered the first joint direct attack munitions from an F-14 on March 11, 2002. These satellite-guided weapons could strike targets through weather that grounded laser-guided munitions. During Operation Iraqi Freedom, in 2003, 5 more F-14 squadrons flew 2,547 combat sorties and dropped over 1,400 precision munitions. The debate over the F-14 versus the F/A-18 Hornet remains one of naval aviation's most passionate arguments. Pilots who flew both aircraft offer nuanced assessments, but the numbers heavily favor the Tomcat in several critical areas. Speed presented the starkest contrast. The F-14 reached Mach 2.34. Both the F/A-18C and F/A-18EF topped out at approximately Mach 1.8, roughly 350 miles per hour, slower at comparable altitudes. For a fleet defense fighter that needed to reach incoming threats before they launched their missiles, this difference could be decisive. Range told an equally compelling story. The F-14 carried approximately 16,000 pounds of internal fuel, giving it a combat radius of roughly 500 to 600 nautical miles. The Super Hornet's combat radius was approximately 390 to 490 nautical miles, depending on loadout. Bob Kress, Grumman's F-14 engineering manager, calculated that the Super Hornet possessed only 36% of the F-14D's payload range capability. The deficit was so severe that the Navy developed buddy tanker configurations using Super Hornets to refuel other Super Hornets, reducing the number of aircraft available for strike missions. Radar and weapons reach showed similar disparities. The AWG-9 and APG-71 had approximately twice the detection range of the Hornet's radar and searched roughly 14 times more airspace volume. The AIM-54 Phoenix could engage targets beyond 100 nautical miles. The F/A-18's longest-range missile, the AIM-120AM-RAAM, reached approximately 50 to 86 nautical miles under optimal conditions. No Hornet variant could carry the Phoenix. Reconnaissance capabilities highlighted another gap. The F-14, equipped with TARPS, the Tactical Airborne Reconnaissance Pod System, was the Navy's only manned tactical reconnaissance platform from 1982 until the Tomcat's retirement in 2006. No F/A-18 variant carried an equivalent system during the F-14's service life. When the Tomcat retired, the Navy lost its only fighter capable of performing this mission. The Hornet held clear advantages in other areas. Close-range maneuvering favored the smaller, more agile F/A-18. Maintenance burden ran roughly half that of the Tomcat, translating to more available aircraft per squadron. Weapons variety increased with each Hornet upgrade, and per-flight-hour operating costs ran significantly lower. As one pilot who flew both aircraft put it, the Hornet is way better in the phone booth. The slow fight, gunning a guy, the Hornet wins every time. But in the fleet defense mission, detecting incoming threats at extreme range, dashing out at supersonic speed, and engaging multiple targets simultaneously beyond 100 miles, the Tomcat had no equal. When the F-14 retired, that capability went with it. The AIM-54 Phoenix was retired without replacement. No carrier-based aircraft has replicated the F-14's combined radar range, missile reach, speed, and combat radius since. The Fleet Defense Mission, as the Tomcat generation understood it, no longer exists in American naval aviation. The F-14A's greatest weakness was not an enemy weapon or a design flaw in the airframe. It was the engine bolted inside the aircraft. The Pratt & Whitney TF-30, the world's first afterburning turbofan, was originally designed for the F-111B's straight and level flight profile. It was never intended for the violent throttle transients, high angles of attack, and aggressive maneuvering inherent to air combat. At high angles of attack, the airflow entering the engine became disturbed. Excessive yaw or side slip created similar problems. Rapid throttle movements, the kind pilots instinctively made during combat maneuvering, pushed the engine beyond its designed operating envelope. Above 30,000 feet, the thinner air amplified these vulnerabilities. The result was compressor stalls, sudden losses of power that could prove catastrophic. Because the F-14's two engines sat 9 feet apart, a single engine stall created violent asymmetric thrust. The aircraft would yaw sharply toward the dead engine while the running engine continued to produce power. At high angles of attack, this asymmetric condition often triggered an unrecoverable flat spin. The aircraft would rotate around its vertical axis while falling, tumbling out of control with both crew members along for the ride. The real-world phenomenon inspired Top Gun's most famous scene. Navy Secretary John Lehman told Congress in 1984 that the TF-30 engine in the F-14 was probably the worst engine-airplane mismatch the service had experienced in many years. He added that the sooner the Navy got out of the TF-30, the happier he would be. The numbers vindicated his assessment. 28.2% of all F-14 accidents were attributed to TF-30 problems. Between 1976 and 1993, compressor stall-related crashes destroyed 31 aircraft and killed 6 crew members. At least 40 F-14 as total were lost to engine-related incidents. Of 632 F-14s built for the Navy, 144 were destroyed in accidents of all types. Nearly 1/4 of the entire production run was consumed by attrition. The Navy originally planned to replace the TF-30 with the Pratt & Whitney F-401, a purpose-designed engine for the Tomcat. But that program was cancelled for cost and reliability reasons during the budget pressures of the mid-1970s. This decision condemned F-14A crews to fly with a dangerous engine for 18 years until the General Electric F-110 arrived with the F-14B. Rear Admiral Paul Gilchrist spoke for generations of Tomcat drivers when he wrote that he did not believe anyone who ever flew the F-14A would argue that the airplane's greatest single weakness was the engine. Pilots more colorfully called their aircraft a nice airplane powered by 2 pieces of junk. Beyond the engines, the Tomcat demanded extraordinary maintenance, 40 to 60 man-hours per flight hour compared to roughly 20 for the FA-18C and as few as 5 to 15 for the Super Hornet. The complex variable sweep wing mechanism required constant attention. Aging wiring degraded over time. Salt air corrosion attacked every exposed surface. The labor-intensive AWG-9 radar demanded specialized technicians. Each maintenance issue drove costs relentlessly upward. By retirement, the F-14 was the most expensive aircraft to operate in the Navy's inventory. With production ended in 1992 and Grumman's tooling destroyed after the Northrop merger in 1994, spare parts became increasingly scarce. Squadrons resorted to widespread cannibalization, stripping parts from grounded aircraft to keep others flying. The airframes themselves were aging past their design life. The decision to retire the Tomcat was not sentimental, it was mathematical. No name is more synonymous with the F-14 than Captain Dale Snodgrass, known throughout naval aviation by his call sign Snort. The son of a World War II Marine Corsair pilot who later became a Grumman test pilot, Snodgrass grew up around military aircraft. He was the first flight school graduate selected for the F-14 pipeline, beginning an association with the Tomcat that would define his career. He accumulated over 4,800 flight hours and more than 1,200 carrier landings in the Tomcat, both all-time records for the type. Named Navy Fighter Pilot of the Year in 1985 and Grumman's Top Cat of the Year in 1986, he served as a Top Gun instructor and commanded VF-33 during Desert Storm, leading 34 combat missions. His reputation among Tomcat pilots was legendary. His most enduring image was captured in the summer of 1988 aboard USS America during a Independence Day cruise. Opening his air demonstration with VF-33, Snodgrass made a knife-edge pass at 85 degrees angle of bank at flight deck level, traveling 325 to 330 knots. The resulting photograph, with Captain J. Johnson, the air wing commander, standing casually with hands behind his back as 54,000 pounds of Tomcat screamed past at eye level, became one of the most famous aviation photographs ever taken. Johnson later became Chief of Naval Operations. Snodgrass performed approximately 400 military air demonstrations over 14 years, an unprecedented record. After retiring as commander of Fighter Wing Atlantic, where he oversaw 14 F-14 squadrons, more than 300 aircraft, and 5,000 personnel, he flew vintage warbirds on the airshow circuit. He was killed on July 24, 2021, age 72, in a civilian aircraft crash in Idaho. The NTSB investigation found that he had failed to remove the flight control lock before takeoff. Lieutenant Cara Hultgreen became the first female carrier-based fighter pilot in United States Navy history when she qualified aboard USS Constellation in July 1994, assigned to VF-213 Black Lions. She represented a new generation of naval aviators breaking barriers that had stood for decades. On October 25, 1994, approaching USS Abraham Lincoln off San Diego for a routine carrier landing, Hultgreen applied left rudder to correct an overshooting approach. The control input disrupted airflow to the port TF-30 engine, triggering the compressor stall that had killed so many pilots before her. She selected full afterburner on the remaining engine, attempting to recover, but asymmetric thrust at low altitude created catastrophic roll. The aircraft banked past 90 degrees. Radar Intercept Officer Lieutenant Matthew Clemish ejected successfully, his seat firing him clear of the tumbling aircraft. Hultgreen ejected 0.4 of a second later, but by then the aircraft had rolled past 100 degrees. Her seat fired downward, into the ocean. The entire event lasted less than 20 seconds. Her body was recovered 19 days later from 3,700 feet of water, still strapped in her ejection seat. She was buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. In a haunting detail that connected the Tomcats' triumphs and tragedies, the aircraft Hultgreen died in carried Bureau No. 160390. It was the same Fast Eagle 107 that Lieutenant Majinski had flown to score one of the 2 Libyan kills over the Gulf of Sidra in 1981. An aircraft that had made history in combat took the life of a pioneer. Captain James Winnefeld Jr. flew F-14s on multiple deployments, served as a Top Gun instructor, and commanded VF-211. His memoir includes a harrowing account of ejecting from an F-14 at night over open water, surviving an experience that killed others. On September 11, 2001, then Captain Winnefeld was commanding USS Enterprise. When reports of the terrorist attacks reached the carrier, he made an independent decision without waiting for orders from higher command. He reversed course toward the Arabian Sea. Enterprise aircraft were within striking range of Afghanistan the next morning, flying nearly 700 combat missions in the weeks that followed. The decision demonstrated initiative that would characterize his entire career. Winnefeld rose to become the 9th Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the second highest-ranking military officer in the United States. From Tomcat cockpit to the Situation Room, his career embodied the leadership pipeline that naval aviation produced. The 1986 film Top Gun transformed the F-14 from a military platform into a cultural icon. Inspired by Ehud Yoneh's 1983 California magazine profile of F-14 crew members attending the Top Gun course at Naval Air Station Miramar, the film used real F-14s from VF-51 Screaming Eagles and VF-111 Sundowners. The Navy charged Paramount over $1.8 million for equipment access, at a rate of $7,600 per flight hour. Tom Cruise flew in the back seat of actual Tomcats during filming, and was reportedly the only actor who did not get sick during the violent maneuvering required for aerial sequences. The experience left a lasting impression that would shape his career for decades. The film boosted Navy recruitment and public awareness considerably. Recruiters set up booths in cinema lobbies to capitalize on audience enthusiasm. Surveys found that roughly 90% of new aviation program applicants had seen the film. The Library of Congress selected Top Gun for the National Film Registry in 2015, recognizing its cultural significance. Top Gun Maverick, released in 2022, paid direct tribute to the aircraft that made the original film iconic. The climactic sequence features Tom Cruise's character stealing an enemy F-14 and engaging advanced fighters in a dogfight that showcased the Tomcats' enduring appeal. Since all operational Tomcats had been retired and destroyed, filmmakers used an engineless F-14 from a museum for ground scenes, with aerial sequences created digitally. The film grossed $1.49 billion worldwide and earned 6 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture. Iran received 79 of 80 ordered F-14 as between 1976 and 1978 under Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, along with 284 AIM-54 Phoenix missiles. The deal cost approximately $2 billion and represented one of the largest arms sales in American history to that point. Iran became the only nation besides the United States to operate the Tomcat. After the 1979 Islamic Revolution severed American support, Iranian engineers faced an impossible task. They needed to keep the most complex fighter aircraft in the world operational without spare parts, technical manuals, or manufacturer support. They succeeded through cannibalization, reverse engineering, and clandestine parts smuggling that continued for decades. During the Iran-Iraq War, from 1980 to 1988, Iranian F-14s compiled a remarkable combat record. Iran claimed approximately 160 air-to-air kills, though historian Tom Cooper, who conducted extensive interviews with Iranian pilots and accessed declassified records, independently confirmed approximately 55 of these. The confirmed kills included MiG-21s, MiG-23s, MiG-25s, Tu-22 bombers, Mirage F-1s, and Super Étendards. Iran is the only country to have achieved confirmed combat kills with the AIM-54 Phoenix. The United States Navy fired 3 Phoenixes in anger, all in 1999 over Iraq during enforcement of the no-fly zones. All 3 missiles missed their targets, which fled before impact. In one celebrated engagement on January 7, 1981, a single Phoenix fired at a 4-ship formation of MiG-23BNs detonated on the lead aircraft. The explosion and debris destroyed 2 more MiGs in the tight formation and damaged the 4th. 3 kills with 1 missile remains the most efficient Phoenix engagement in history. Iraqi pilots feared the Iranian F-14 so intensely that detecting an AWG-9 radar lock was often sufficient to abort missions without any missile being fired. The psychological impact of facing an aircraft that could kill you from 100 miles away proved as valuable as the actual weapon system. Major Jalil Zandi became the highest-scoring F-14 ace in history, with 11 credited kills, 8 confirmed, and 3 probable according to American intelligence assessments. He later achieved the rank of brigadier general before his death in a 2001 automobile accident near Tehran. No American pilot achieved ace status in the Tomcat because no American F-14 saw enough air combat to accumulate 5 kills. The United States' decision to shred all retired F-14s at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base was driven explicitly by the need to prevent parts from reaching Iran through black market channels. The shredding began in 2007 after an Associated Press investigation revealed security gaps that allowed F-14 parts to be sold illegally. By 2009, every retired Tomcat had been destroyed. A 100,000-pound shearing machine reduced $38 million fighters to 2-by-2-foot scrap metal fragments. The boneyard that had preserved aircraft for decades became a destroyer of airframes. The final chapter began on September 1, 2005. VF-31 Tomcatters and VF-213 Black Lions, both flying F-14Ds, departed Norfolk aboard USS Theodore Roosevelt for what everyone knew would be the Tomcats' farewell cruise. The 2 squadrons carried 22 F-14Ds, widely regarded as the best-maintained Tomcats taken on deployment in years. Maintenance crews had lavished attention on aircraft they knew would never deploy again. Carrier Air Wing 8 Commander Captain William Sizemore oversaw the air wing. Commander Richard LaBranche commanded VF-31. Both men understood the historical significance of what they were doing. The deployment was no valedictory lap. VF-213 dropped the first ordnance of the cruise in October 2005, destroying rocket and mortar positions near Ramadi, Iraq. In December, the F-14Ds received ROVER-3 downlinks, making them the first Navy aircraft to transmit real-time targeting imagery directly to ground controllers. VF-31 achieved a 100% target destruction rate with this capability. The Tomcat was proving itself until the very end. Aircraft scheduled for retirement in months were performing missions that saved lives on the ground. On February 8, 2006, Lieutenant Bill Frank of VF-31 released a 500-pound GBU-38 Joint Direct Attack munition over Iraq. The satellite-guided weapon fell toward its target and detonated. It was the last bomb ever dropped from an F-14 Tomcat. That night, Captain Sizemore flew VF-213's aircraft 204 on the final combat mission, trapping aboard Roosevelt at 0035 hours. The last F-14 combat recovery in history. The deployment compiled 1,163 combat sorties and 6,876 flight hours. The Tomcat community had one final chance to demonstrate what the aircraft could do. They made it count. Commander LaBranche captured the squadron's mood in an interview before returning home. As we near the end of the Tomcat's last deployment, he said, "We are proud of our legacy and take solace in the fact that the Tomcat is going out at the top of its game. But we also regret saying farewell to an old, revered and trusted friend." Theodore Roosevelt returned to Norfolk on March 11, 2006. The 22 F-14Ds made their final flight from carrier to shore. On July 28, 2006, VF-31 conducted the last catapult launch of an F-14 from a carrier off the Virginia Capes aboard Roosevelt. The official Tomcat sunset retirement ceremony took place at Naval Air Station Oceana on September 22, 2006. In a moment of fitting irony, the primary aircraft experienced mechanical problems on the runway, one final reminder of the maintenance challenges that hastened retirement. A backup F-14D took its place for the ceremonial flyby. The last official flight. The absolute last F-14 flight in United States Navy history occurred on October 4, 2006. Lieutenant Commander Chris Richard and Lieutenant Commander Robert Gentry ferried Bureau No. 1, 64603, callsign Felix 1, from Naval Air Station Oceana to Republic Airport in Farmingdale, Long Island. The jet landed at the doorstep of its birthplace, the former Grumman facility where the first Tomcat had rolled out 36 years earlier. Felix 1 was the 711th of 712 Tomcats built. During its service life, it flew 175 combat sorties. It strafed Taliban forces with its Vulcan cannon in Afghanistan. It delivered precision-guided munitions in Iraq. When its wheels touched the runway at Farmingdale, one of the most storied careers in American military aviation came to an end. The aircraft now resides at the Cradle of Aviation Museum in Garden City, New York. Other notable preserved Tomcats include Bureau No. 159610, one of the 1989 MiG killers, at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum's Udvar Hazy Center. Bureau No. 160403, Fast Eagle 102 from the 1981 Libya engagement, sits at the Commemorative Air Force Museum in Midland, Texas. Dozens more stand as monuments at naval air stations and aviation museums across the country. The F-14 Tomcat occupies a singular place in military aviation history, not because it was perfect. The TF-30 engine killed its own crews. The maintenance burden crushed squadron readiness. The airframes aged badly in the final years. But the Tomcat represented an uncompromising answer to an existential threat, and no compromise could replicate what it achieved. No other aircraft combined a 100-mile missile, a radar that could track 24 targets simultaneously, Mach 2.34 speed, a 500 nautical mile combat radius, and the versatility to evolve from pure interceptor into one of the Navy's most lethal precision strike platforms. The fleet defense mission the F-14 was built for has never been fully replicated by its successors. The AIM-54 Phoenix was retired without replacement. The AIM-120 AMRAAM that replaced it reaches roughly half the distance. The Super Hornet flies slower. No carrier aircraft today can simultaneously track and engage 6 separate targets at ranges exceeding 100 miles. The capability that defined a generation of naval aviation simply disappeared. Mike Rabens, president of the F-14 Tomcat Association, described what it meant to serve in the community. Being in an F-14 squadron in that era was a heady experience, he said, because you knew you were at the top of the world when it comes to mastery of the skies. Captain Sizemore, making that final combat trap, offered a simpler assessment. The F-14 was one of the best airplanes ever built. Powerful, presence, looking like the ultimate fighter. Perhaps the most honest epitaph was spray-painted on a Tomcat fuselage at the Boneyard in Arizona before the shredders came. Tomcats by choice, Hornets by mandate. The 712 Tomcats Grumman built served for 32 years. They compiled a perfect air-to-air record against enemy fighters, 5 kills without a single loss. They starred in the biggest movie of 1986. They flew combat from the Gulf of Sidra to the skies over Baghdad. And they inspired a devotion in their crews that no aircraft before or since has matched. The Navy retired the F-14 because it had to. The maintenance costs were unsustainable. The airframes were wearing out. The engines that powered the original model had killed too many good pilots. Mathematics demanded a decision that sentiment rejected. But among those who flew her, who fixed her, who launched her from pitching flight decks into hostile skies, the Tomcat was never just an airplane. She was the last of a breed, the ultimate expression of what a carrier fighter could be. And when she made that final flight from Oceana to Farmingdale, something irreplaceable left American naval aviation forever. No aircraft has taken her place. None ever will.